morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Sophie Pedder. I'm the Paris bureau chief and for The Economist, and it's my pleasure to act as your moderator today for what promises to be really an amazing lineup of speakers and panels. So for me, coming from the UK, it's particularly exciting to be able to see such a great depth of expertise in the subject that we're going to be talking about today, which is AI. So this is the second edition of the Artificial Intelligence for Alternative Investment conferences by Ardian after its successful launch last year. The focus this year is particularly pressing. It's AI sovereignty. We all know that AI is evolving at an extraordinary and unprecedented pace, and that's posing all sorts of questions for businesses, for governments, for institutions, about how we can make sure that what we build is free of dependencies, is aligned with our domestic priorities, and is resilient against the geopolitical pressures of the moment. So we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers, all of whom are absolutely on the cutting edge of AI thinking. You will have the chance during the coffee break and during the cocktail lunch at the end of the morning to interact with them, to follow up if you've got questions. And before we listen to our first speaker, I would like to invite Mathias Burghardt to join me on the stage. We're going to have a short exchange to launch the event. Mathias, of course, is Executive Vice President of Ardian, which, as you all know, is a world-leading private investment firm which manages 192 billion in assets now. He's also CEO of Ardian France, and he's our real host today. It's not me. I'd like to thank him for organizing this event. Thank you, Mathias. Now, the first question I've got for you is, I was reading the FT this morning on coming in, and they had an editorial in it which suggested that the EU's AI Act should go on pause, that it's too restrictive. I'm wondering what you make of that. Is there something going on with US tech lobbies that is pushing Europe to reconsider what it's up to?
Hello Sophie, bonjour, bienvenue à Paris. Maybe before we start, we have all a special thought today for as we commemorate the 10th anniversary of the attack to Bataclan Music Hall. Was a terrible attack to Parisian youth, but beyond Parisian youth, I think to our values and our democracy. So, and that shows importance to defend our values, and it's also about sovereignty. About the pressure we have, we all know, because there's been a public declaration from the US administration and the tech companies that they perceive the EU regulation as an obstacle of the development of AI, and in particular to the development of technological companies in the US, which is particularly sensitive in a time where there's a lot of, I was in New York last week, comments whether there is a bubble, whether there's overvaluation, so they definitely don't need bad news. What I can say is, in my view, Europe has focused too much on becoming a normative power. At the time where we thought the world, the prevailing forces were law and global trade, Europe was very much focusing on raising its influence towards normative power. I think it was, I don't know if a mistake at that time, but certainly not a strong strategy in today's world, where basically the US power, China power are just focusing their domination on strengths, on their companies. Recently, the founder of AXA, which is very important to Ardian, passed away, as you know, and he said a very obvious thing, is that France will be strong if its French companies were strong. And that's applied, I think, very much to Europe as well. So I think Europe now needs to focus much more, rather than trying to regulate things, in fostering the emergence of European tech companies, to foster our research, and to regain control of our infrastructures and our supply chain. Europe is too much on the regulation, is, I think, too much sensitive to lobbying, and I think we should much more focus on the real economy, on our companies, rather than just on being a consumer market.
Well, I want to come back to that, but I first of all would like to ask you about the subject that you've chosen for this event. Now, last year you had Philippe Aghion. Prescient decision to invite him because he's just been awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics. And the subject then was obviously the role of creative destruction in growth, particularly with an AI focus. Why have you chosen sovereignty and AI for this year's event?
Well, Philippe Aghion, and we are very proud that we invited him to host and to be the first speaker and the honor speaker before he became Nobel Prize. So, Frédérick, maybe there will be a good chance for you to have next year the Nobel Prize, I hope. Yes, at that time, it was obvious that AI will have a massive disruption, but also opportunity because of the massive productivity gains, to launch a new era of the economy. But what we see now is it's not just an economical topic, but also a geopolitical topic. Why? Because when you think about it, our cloud services are provided at 70% by US companies. NVIDIA provide 90% of the chips for AI, and LLMs, which are used at industrial scale, are almost all, except Mistral, American. So it's not only about our economy, but also the social model. Our culture will be shaped by those algorithms and this infrastructure, which we don't control at all. If you remember what happened a couple of weeks ago, when all the cloud was suffering of a strong failure, all the airports, including Israel, and you know we are the main shareholder of Israel, have to deal with this problem. So we have to regain control of our infrastructure, have our own tech, if we want not only to be performing from an economical point of view, but also preserve our social model. And you know that in Europe we are very much keen to preserve our social model, our values. Otherwise, we'll have to accept the biais and the culture coming from outside, and it's not the normative power that will save us if we don't have the means to really of our autonomy.
But isn't that exactly the problem? That because we have these values and we want to enshrine them and we want to reinforce them, that Europe is having to make compromises that means it could be left behind in the AI race. Can Europe still compete?
I think Europe has strengths. And the first, because that's my job, Europe has a lot of capital. When you think about it, we save 15% of our revenues, while in the US it's only 4%. The problem is that in Europe we don't invest in productive economy. 1/3 of this capital is invested in debt, on cash. Only 25% is invested in equity, while in the US 50% is invested in equity. So that's the strength. So if we manage to channel our capital to critical investment, this is an incredible power we can mobilize. To give you an example, we just raised our 20 billion fund, infrastructure fund, which is meant to invest predominantly in Europe in those critical infrastructure, which are connectivity, both transport and virtual connectivity, with energy transition, and we raised 20 billion, 60% coming from outside Europe. So it shows that we have potential. Even investors from abroad want to invest, but we need to be focused on enhancing research, in scaling our tech companies, and regain control of our infrastructures.
You mentioned the 20 billion euros that you raised for the infrastructure fund. Is it the case that the focus on digital sovereignty has fueled the market's appetite for infrastructure investment?
Certainly. And I mentioned infrastructure, but I could mention as well, we launched a fund of semiconductors. We have a fund which is dedicated to energy transition or green hydrogen. And we are raising massively investment even beyond Europe, or predominantly beyond Europe. Why? Because if you look to the growth, it's true that Europe has a lower growth than US. But if you look to the specific sectors, which are the tech companies or this critical infrastructure, our growth is as strong as in the US. So, and at the price are generally lower. So it's worth investing in those sectors. It's not just for patriotism, it's because it's worth investing in those sectors in Europe.
Well, that's one of the key questions we're going to try and address this morning. I think we'll let you go. Thank you for speaking to us this morning. And we'll move now to our keynote speaker, who I'll introduce in one moment. Thank you very much, Mathias. So we're going to turn to our keynote speaker, and the title of her speech is going to be The Hidden Face of AI Geopolitics. Now, I'm going to offer a few words of introduction to Frédérick Douzet. On paper, she's professor of geopolitics at the French Institute of Geopolitics at the University of Paris 8. But the most important thing you really need to know, I'm told, about her, is that she's very modest. And she won't tell you what I will tell you. And that is that she is actually Europe's foremost expert in the geopolitics of AI and digital networks. And she's a world expert in the geopolitical threats to particular critical infrastructure. She won a prestigious European Research Council grant, one of the most competitive in the EU, for her Data Routes project. And this is Europe's most important project for mapping internet routes and their manipulation for strategic purposes. So she's here today. It's a real opportunity to listen to somebody who can talk to us about how digital infrastructure is being shaped and weaponized by state and non-state actors in the world today. So please join me in welcoming Frédérick on stage for this year's keynote speech.
Well, thank you very much for your invitation. And between the introduction and the perspective of the Nobel Prize, I'm super impressed. So the subject, I don't see the slides. Yeah. The subject of sovereignty in the digital age has generated significant discussion over the past decade, but obviously this has not prevented the European Union to become increasingly dependent on foreign digital infrastructures. And these dependencies could deepen with the rise of AI in ways that are often not visible. And I believe it is important to measure both the extent and the depth of our strategic dependencies to understand how they can be weaponized in a context of heightened geopolitical tensions. And some of these dimensions are very difficult to measure and comprehend because they are highly abstract and they require fundamental research. And this is what we do in the context of the ERC project Data Routes. And I will explain the importance of understanding the geography of internet routes and how they can be manipulated for strategic purpose. So let me begin with an anecdote. On May 30th, 2022, at 2:43 in the afternoon, the internet went down in the city of Kherson for nearly an hour. And at the time, at gunpoint, Russian troops forced local operators to disconnect from Ukraine network to reconnect through Russia, through Moscow. Why? Because for Russia, controlling internet routes in order to control information has become a strategic priority, and this is clearly stated in the 2019 law on the sovereign internet, also called the RUNET. But this is part of a broader trend of turning to infrastructure for geopolitical control. So the internet has been a highly dynamic environment. That's what defines it. It's constantly changing. And it's been going through phases of decentralization and concentration at different levels of analysis, like any network. But today we observe two basic trends for the internet. First, on the one hand, a dynamic of fragmentation along national borders for reasons of national security and sovereignty. And some states seek control to restore control over the borders of what they consider their national cyberspace. This fragmentation is often criticized as the balkanization of the internet, and it tends to focus most of the political attention. However, if we shift to a level of analysis at a higher level of abstraction, what we see is another dynamic, this time driven by market forces and performance, which is the concentration of data traffic around a few major players in data routing, and the privatization of internet routes by major platforms such as Google, Meta, or Amazon. So this is very invisible, but it also leads to a form of fragmentation along commercial lines that is also problematic in terms of free flow of data and internet resilience, and it raises complex issues of sovereignty as well. So these issues matter because they have implications in terms of resilience of the internet. Centralization and concentration create points of vulnerability. The entire model of resilience of the internet is based on the availability of multiple alternative routes. So the more concentration you have, the less alternative routes. And we have a decrease of these alternative routes right now at the summit of the internet. The second aspect is human rights and geopolitical risks, because when you control the routes of internet, you can filter content, you can conduct censorship, you also can conduct surveillance, monitor the traffic, you can cut off the internet for populations, and you can weaponize the strategic dependencies of other countries. So in order to explain how we work, I need first to explain how the internet works. The internet, so a network can be a connection between two computers, or it can be a connection between two or more networks. The internet is a network of networks. And in order to travel across the internet, data hops from one network to another network. And that requires a physical route, which is a cable, satellite, and a logical route, which is an agreement between the administrators of two networks to exchange data. It's like a railway switch, or it's like a GPS. Your data needs to know where it can go. So the internet is made of these separate entities. We call them autonomous systems because they decide how to route the data within their networks, but also across the internet through these agreements. And these autonomous systems, they are private companies, they can be internet service providers, they can be government entities, they can be universities. And some of them play a specific role. They are global operators who circulate data, large amounts of data worldwide. So in order to communicate, they communicate in the clear. They use a protocol called the Border Gateway Protocol. And we capture with our platform, our Border Gateway Protocol platform, we capture the announcement that they make constantly to explain what routes are available, and we use them to create relational graphs, a cartography of the internet. And that reveals the hidden structure of the internet, because the agreements between the network operators are often confidential. So we use this observatory to generate graphs. We complement it with open source data to understand where they're registered, what's the name associated to them, where they're located, and so on. in these relational graphs, the nodes represent the separate networks, and the links represent the logical routes between them. And then we apply algorithms to spatialize them. So the closer the nodes, the more links they share, the farther apart, the less links they share. So this is very geopolitical. I just want a quick example on India and Pakistan. You see on the left, that's a map of the national operator showing that they actually built a cable, a physical cable between the two countries. On the right is the map of the International Telecommunications Union. That's declaration of state. They pretend there is no link, no cable between the two. But what's interesting is we know there's a physical route, but when you do the logical graph, on the bottom is India's autonomous systems, on the top is Pakistan, and there is no logical route because they don't trust each other, so they have no agreement to exchange data. So all of this can be and is being weaponized for strategic purpose. The best example is probably Iran, which completely redesigned its architecture of connectivity after the Stuxnet attack on its nuclear facilities. And in November 2019, within 24 hours, Iran was able to selectively block most of its traffic to and from the global internet. So you see that some traffic was still going. That's the traffic that's vital for the economy. This level of sophistication requires to have a very clear cartography of the network so that you know exactly what internet addresses you're going to go let through to go outside of your domestic network. And again, in 2025, after the bombing from Israel, Iran disconnected itself from the global internet in order to prevent cyber attacks from coming in and strategic information from leaking out. So what's interesting is that as early as June 9, 2018, our team was able to guess that Iran could be able to do that because of the architecture of connectivity. So this is, I'm going to skip this. This is just a slide showing how Iran is connected to the rest of the Middle East. And we see that Iran is really on the margin of the graph because it has very few links to the rest of the region. But more interestingly, this is a simplified graph of Iran's network on the left and the major international autonomous systems it is connected to. And what we see on this is that we only have 3 networks that connect Iran's domestic network to the global internet in 2018. The information technology company, telecommunication infrastructure company, 2 government-controlled companies, and the Institute for Research in Fundamental Sciences, IPM, which was the historical provider that brought the internet to Iran. So there is clearly a bottleneck between Iran's domestic network and the rest of the internet, and the government-controlled networks serve as the gatekeepers. They control access to foreign content and decide what traffic goes through this strategic bottleneck. So we also examine the structure of connectivity within the country. And what's interesting is the domestic network itself is not centralized. We see that Respina, which is the main internet service provider, is not one of the gateways. The gateways are not strategic here. We have a lot of nodes and a lot of alternative routes. And what Iran did is building a complex and resilient domestic network. It has a high number of autonomous systems, much more than other countries around. It has a high number of alternative routes internally, but it has a tight control at its border, which is a strategic choice. And Iran has a much more complex network than other countries in the region, and it has developed its network to enhance its resilience by fear of attacks on it. So it can adjust its level of international connectivity according to its interest and its strategic objective, including partial, temporary, or complete disconnections. So these trends are even more pronounced in 2023. This is the new graph, and you see that you still have IPM with very few academic connections, and the main gateway now is quite unique and connects much fewer international autonomous systems than it used to be before. This is what allows the government to conduct internet curfews after the death of Masha Amini with the protest in September 2022. So we used also, to help explain how this can happen, we use virtual reality. And what you're going to see on this is, on the left, you have Iran's network. In the middle, you have this international gateway, and on the right, you have international autonomous systems. And we'll show you what happens when you cut. I hope you can see the links pretty well. You cut the connections of IPM, and you cut the connection of this gateway, and then Iran is left alone in cyberspace with no connection to the rest of the internet. So Iran has really developed a structure of connectivity that help reconcile objectives that seem initially conflicting strategic goals, which is to have a self-sustaining and resilient domestic network with tight control at its borders. This is exactly what Russia is trying to do now. Our study on Ukraine shows that actions on the routing architecture were implemented as early as 2014, immediately after the Maidan Revolution, when Russian forces took control of the Crimean Peninsula and began supporting separatist forces in eastern Ukraine. And in both cases, Russian authorities and separatist forces modified internet logical routes to divert local traffic away from continental Ukraine towards Russia. And these manipulations effectively created a form of digital frontline that is consistent with the military frontline. This led to the fragmentation of Ukraine's cyberspace and the emergence of separate subspaces. So we observe three tendencies that I'm going to illustrate: the breakup and progressive integration of Crimea into the Russian network, the marginalization of Donbass, and the gradual increase in distance between the two countries. So this graph is a graph that shows all the networks of Ukraine and all the networks they are connected to. So we see that it's a very rich graph. Very tight as well. But you see on the margin, you have the autonomous systems that are registered in Crimea and in Donbass. And if they are on the margin, is because they have very few links with the rest of the graph. And this can be explained by several factors. I'm just showing you a close-up. And what you're seeing is that previously, those networks, LLC, Krelcom, Crimea South LLC, were completely embedded into Ukraine's network. That's the situation in 2013. That's the situation in 2019. So as soon as March 2014, the Prime Minister tweeted that data transit between Crimea and Moscow could not be provided by foreign companies, indicating a deliberate strategy of territorial appropriation of the cyberspace of Crimea. And this progressive strategy involved deploying two cables in 2014 and 2017, because initially they tried to cut it off from Ukraine, but they didn't have enough bandwidth to provide connectivity to Crimea. And 3 years later, it led to this digital annexation of Crimea. So Crimea's network become increasingly centralized around three major actors close to Russian authorities. And you're seeing Miranda Media, which was a branch of Rostelecom, which emerged as a central actor in the system to connect Crimea to Russia. But also Russia progressively acquired these autonomous systems and stopped and some of them also stopped operating in Crimea. And this is also a side effect of Ukraine's sanction against companies that continued to provide internet connectivity to Crimea after the annexation. So either they stopped business or they just sold their company to Russia. These graphs are even more telling. So here we represent only Ukraine in blue and Russia in red, and the ties between them. And what you see progressively is after the first cable, the distance between the two networks starts increasing, and Crimea starts being on the margin, moving on the margin of the graph. This increased further in May 17, and you see that at different points of the crisis, you see the relationship evolving, and now the two networks are much more further apart. Crimea is isolated and Donbass is marginalized. Of course, these trends have completely continued during the war that broke out in 2022. And what we're observing is a new digital front line consistent with the military front line. So the graphs I've showed you right now, up to now, they show all the possible routes, but they don't show the actual traffic. So what we did to verify our data is we used trace routes, which basically consists in sending data packets across the internet, and then every time they hit a router, they tell us, I went through that router. So then we can trace the routes that our data packets have taken to understand what are the constraints. And what we observe here is we did an experiment sending data packets to Kyiv from two separate cities located on each side of the front at the time. So it was Kherson and Nova Kakhovka. And what you see on the top is how we drew the routes. And clearly, they're less than 50 miles apart, but they took completely different routes to reach their destination. In one case, the traffic remained in Ukraine and reached Kyiv quite directly. In the other case, because it was occupied territory, it left Ukraine, went through different countries and ended up, and through Moscow and through different countries before it came back to Ukraine. So the control of infrastructure is strategic and creates fragmentation that affects the information space, that traps populations in potentially government-controlled information bubbles, but it also creates resilience issue for the internet, because the more control space you have, the less alternative routes you have. If all the nodes of a domestic network can carry traffic across the internet, then you have much more alternative routes than if you only have a single point of entry to this network. But there is also another form of fragmentation which is less known and less visible, which is the privatization of internet routes by major platforms. Google, Meta, and Amazon are now laying their own submarine cables, deploying their own intercontinental routing architectures, and by doing so, they bypass traditional public internet routing operators. So they extend their wide area networks as close as possible to the users. This concentration contributes to what some specialists call the flattening of the internet. And the same handful of giants dominate the internet infrastructures, but also its most popular services and applications. So they control not only the content, but also the means of transferring it. They become their own internet backbone. And what do they do that? A couple of days ago, I found this amazing quote from Alex Ames, the vice president of network investment at Meta, who says that oftentimes when people think about AI, they think about data centers, they think about compute, they think about data. But the reality is, without the connectivity that connects those data centers, what you have are really expensive warehouses. So this trend is largely driven by the evolution of the traffic as these platforms, this is just an example of other cables, these platforms now concentrate a very large share of the internet traffic due to their massive users databases. Initially it was access to video that drove this traffic, but now, then it was cloud, and now AI. And you see that you take just Alphabet and Meta, and it's 39% of the fixed internet traffic and 42% of mobile internet traffic. This is changing the shape of the internet with significant consequences. The first is a resilience consequence with a first paradox, which is, on the one hand, this new architecture decreases the load on the internet backbone because the platforms go closer to the user, so most of the traffic remains local. But the problem is these platforms, they carry their own traffic. They don't carry the traffic of the rest of the internet. And by bypassing these traditional operators, they cause a lot of loss of revenue for them. So it's a problem because these other intermediary internet carriers, they're needed to convey the rest of the traffic across the internet. And this trend forces out of business a number of intermediary operators, or they force them into mergers, and this leads to a high concentration around a handful of major routing operators. And if you take the first 10, well, 8 of them are US-based, and you see the amazing difference in the number of networks they serve. I can see the data. The first one serves 53,000 autonomous systems, where the 10th one only 10,000. So you have a huge concentration with some players that control most of the transit power. The second paradox is that concentration may allow these platforms to invest in top talents and the best technology to provide a high-quality service. That's what they argue all the time. But it also, concentration creates a point of vulnerability. And when an incident occurs, like in 2021, Facebook completely disappeared from the internet for several hours with massive impact on its users and all the businesses that relied on it. And same with Amazon more recently. And the problem is, there is no way to understand these vulnerabilities in this traffic because there's a total lack of transparency. It's a black box. We don't know what the architecture looks like. We can know when we use the public internet because it announces the routes in the clear, but not about these platforms. And it also leads to a lack of understanding of mutual dependencies and invisible paths. And the internet flattening has increased the unknown dependencies that can cause disruptions to the service and to the internet that we rely every day on for our usage. So these trends have long-term implication because this vertical integration leads to a set of global monopolies, including search engines, social media, microblogging, and could push out local internet service providers who are unable to compete with these large platforms. In the end, maybe these platforms will replace internet service providers in some parts of the world and provide the last mile to the users, becoming the new gateway to the internet and shaping its content. So it could destroy the internet as we know it and net neutrality. It also has direct strategic implications for the European Union. First, the concentration of transit power in a few private companies, mostly US-based. This can be weaponized in conflict situations, and we've seen it already, with the risk of coercion by the US administration is no longer hypothetical. This lack of transparency from infrastructures we completely depend on, rely on, we do not have any ability to audit the routing system. We do not have the ability to understand how content delivery is managed. But it also has an impact on digital sovereignty and control over data flows, with a risk linked to extraterritoriality of US law, Cloud Act, Patriot Act, and so on, and the difficulty that we've already understood in enforcing EU regulation. And in February, the White House made clear that any European measure that would undermine the competitiveness of American companies will result in retaliation. There's also this question of the strategic dependency on content distribution, because given their dominant position, then a lot of companies and websites rely on them for content distribution. That gives them the ability to discriminate content and prioritize traffic that serves the platform economic interest over the public interest. That allows cultural influence that can help shape perceptions, but that also raises the question of access to critical content that depends on European actors. It also leads to a concentration of economic powers because the platforms capture most of the value created by content distribution and the associated data. And their ability to cut costs reinforces their dominant position, so it reinforces strategic dependencies that can prevent European actors from emerging because the cost of entry is too high. So this poses, of course, an economic problem, but also a democratic one. The influence of these platforms extends beyond the technological sphere and shapes the information landscape of European democracies. And this will be most likely reinforced with generative AI. In addition, major American platforms are now extending their control over the entire digital value chain. This includes content production, software architecture, data distribution via physical and logical infrastructures, and massive computing capabilities that underpin artificial intelligence. But this vertical integration extends to investment even in nuclear facilities to secure their electricity supply and therefore their computing power. So we're at crossroads. In the past decade, we chose a path marked by the massive adoption of US cloud services, leading to major strategic dependencies. The rise of general AI could take us further down this path and deepen this dependency, making it even more difficult and costly to regain our strategic autonomy. I believe there is another path. It requires to develop a comprehensive strategy to establish a more balanced relationship with platforms and thereby regain European strategic autonomy. It also requires major investment in fundamental and interdisciplinary research, in higher education, in promising startups to help them scale up, and in the development of critical infrastructure to develop smaller, efficient, targeted models that serve the public interest and are sustainable. This is our opportunity to build a digital society that protects our sovereignty and the public core of the internet, a society that reflects our democratic values and preserves the planet for future generations. Thank you. Sure.
Thank you. That was fascinating, slightly terrifying. Frédérick has very kindly agreed to take a few questions. We've got about 10 minutes to do that. So if you'd like to ask a question, please put your hand up and we can put them to her. There's a microphone which will move. The gentleman in the second row.
Good morning, Armando Brunini from Milan Airports in Italy. Very simple question. Are we in time? Is it not too late to catch up since we're so far away from where they are in terms of critical mass, in terms of speed that they've got until now?
So, yes, I think there are many things we can do, but it requires major investment. I think my opinion is that we should not try to run a losing race against the US in terms of general AI. And if you look at what the Chinese are doing right now, they're investing massively in AI for business, in smaller models that have direct applications and that are going to be useful. We're good at doing this, and we have really good startups, but we need to help them grow and keep them within our country or the European Union. We have a lot of talent in higher education, in research. This is absolutely critical for innovation, and we need to balance out better fundamental research with applied research so that the two can grow together, and also facilitate the relationship between the academic ecosystem and the private ecosystem. On paper, everybody's for it. Believe me, when you try to do it, especially in social and human sciences, there are a lot of complexities and limitations, and that could be more fluid. We do have these talents, but for a lack of investment, our job is losing its attractivity. And the best talents are now leaving academia. They're either not staying at all in academia or going abroad because we have stopped investing enough in fundamental research and in higher education. So I think this is really critical because we're moving towards a model where if you want to have a grant, except for this European grant, which they really let you come with your own subjects, but otherwise, very often you have calls for proposals with a theme, with a subject. The problem is when you do research, you're very often ahead of the subjects that are the hype. And therefore, that's the reason why you need investment in fundamental research, so that researchers can follow their scientific intuitions. And there's a risk. Sometimes we're wrong. But sometimes we're right, and the recent geopolitical events obviously proved me right.
The gentleman in the fourth row.
Thank you for your presentation. Thierry Moulonguet from FIMELAC. In one of your tables on autonomous system appears a kind of outlier with a Swedish company called Ardian. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us how they made to this rank, number 2 in this list, and can we build around this Swedish company?
So I haven't studied this company in particular, but we also have an Italian company which is pretty high in the rank. I think France is maybe 13th, something like that. So we do have major operators across the European Union. I don't think it's so much about being able to have that level of concentration and compete among the biggest ones. I think what would be necessary is to have less concentration and more players and a more evenly distributed number of autonomous systems that are handled by these different companies. So I don't believe we should aim at having a internet service provider or internet carrier that becomes as big. I think we need to find a way to break this down into smaller operators so that we have more alternative routes and less concentration of transit power into a handful of companies.
There's a lady in the third row who had a question.
Thank you for your presentation, Vanina Kellerson. My question relates to the satellite, and shouldn't Europe, speed up its satellite infrastructure with LEO, and wouldn't that be, a sort of opportunity to balance what you showed us, and especially the second part?
Thank you. So 95% of the traffic goes through submarine cables. And that's where most of the platforms are investing, because satellite connections, first, they have a greater latency, and they can't have the capacity that terrestrial and submarine cables are. But it's important to also invest in satellite communications because that can help connect places that are hard to reach sometimes, or that can help provide connectivity in case of disaster. So they are very useful, but they won't replace the terrestrial and submarine cables.
Mathias Burghardt, and after that, the gentleman in the fourth row on the side.
Yes. Frédérick, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. It was brilliant. I think it really illustrates what is at stake and the position of Europe, and we need really to wake up. Nevertheless, there's something which I am more doubtful to what you're saying, is that you say we should avoid having dominant players like the US, but rather try to have multiple smaller players. In theory, that's the best way to do it, to protect the consumer, but can we really compete if we don't have European champions? Can we really impose our, I would say, theories of good competition to the Americans and the Chinese if we don't have champions?
Well, I think we need both. We both need European champions and also break huge monopolies in order to have more resilience. I mean, at some point, we're transferring all our activities, all our knowledge, everything on digital infrastructures. And in the context of the global transition linked to climate change, everything on electricity. Both infrastructures are highly vulnerable. We concentrate risk on digital infrastructure. If we don't proactively make sure that we maintain their resilience, if we don't make sure that we protect them from weaponization, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So we need to take seriously the resilience of the internet because we completely depend on it.
There's a gentleman in the fourth row.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Michael Chegaspanian from CELAT. And my question is very similar to the previous one about satellite communications. I was wondering what, maybe there is a room for huge progress on the technical side for satellite communication, and does it make, that could we make a change in the rules for sovereignty on one side and for economics? We could make a comparison with when the mobile phone communication appears compared to the wide standard phone communications. It has changed totally the rules of, and it is more distributed network. So I would like to know your point of view on that.
So I don't think that satellite communication, even with technological improvement, will soon be able to carry the capacity and have the short latencies that physical cables can offer. But definitely you have two types of satellites, the geostationary, which has increased latencies compared to the constellations of low orbit satellites like Starlink, who is a dominant player, by the way. But that does not change that much the question of sovereignty. And interesting point, about a year ago, Starlink changed its policy to become an internet transit provider, which it was not before. It was just its own autonomous system. Now it's becoming a transit provider. And I have a student who's doing her PhD on the Nunavut in Great North Canada, where because the traditional operators don't cooperate well with each other, and the geostationary, and because they made the choice of the satellite over developing cable, their level of service is not satisfactory. So Starlink is coming and is winning big market shares. And I just got back from Bangladesh, where interestingly, Starlink is also coming to help provide service to rural areas that are very difficult to connect. So they compete directly with mobile operators, but also because Bangladesh has submarine cables, 2 at the moment and soon to be 3, they want to buy bandwidth from Bangladesh in order to provide service to Nepal and Bhutan. So it's becoming a transit provider, but that also creates sovereignty issues. And just a quick example, right now, the government of Bangladesh filters its internet, the internet it provides to its users. But Starlink to serve Nepal and Bhutan wants unfiltered internet. So they're buying filtered internet to serve Bangladesh and unfiltered internet to serve Nepal and Bhutan. When the next government that wants to do an internet shutdown in Bangladesh, we don't know what Starlink will do. Will Starlink continue to provide connectivity or just provide unfiltered internet? That's a sovereignty issue.
Thank you so much. We're actually out of time, unless we'll take one more question. One absolute last question, and then we'll take a break.
Okay, so thank you, and thank you a lot for the very nice presentation, interesting presentation you did. I got a question, two questions in fact. Did you heard about a project called Ascent? And because to complete the question regarding communication satellite, so last week it has been announced that big companies like NVIDIA, Google, Amazon, SpaceX will invest in space data center. The good news is the fact that that kind of hyperscale project from Europe has been designed, studied 2 years ago during that Ascent project. And now nothing happens. And what we see now in the US is, since the maturity of those technology has reached a level that now it's able to make profit, they invest, they put money, and then we launch. And we, in Europe, based on the fact that we got the talents, we got the scientific engineers, we got the industry to play, we are waiting that such project will require public fundings, public interest, and because today politics and Europe has different topics more than to think about space hyperscaler, we are going to see US and Chinese take a big advance on this. How can we try to change that in order to not be, as has been said during the introduction, suffering that they will impose their values, their process, and their rules?
Well, I think it's a question of changing our culture and accepting risk in investment and learning to move more quickly, because we often have great ideas but take way too much time to implement them. And we see that there is a lot more risk also in a lot more a culture of being more risk averse in terms of investment, including in research. So I think that's where we need to make progress. But that's not for me to say how to do it, because investment is not my field.
Hopefully we'll get to some of those questions in our panels later on. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Frédérick. We now have coffee break, but we need you all back in your seats at 10:40, please, so that we can start the first panel promptly. Thank you. Subject today for the panel number one is about how the rapid acceleration of AI has turning investments in infrastructure like data centers from niche investments into huge strategic assets. What is at stake in terms of sovereignty in such investments, and what should Europe be doing about it? So to discuss this, we have a fantastic panel. I'll start introducing them from on my left. Michel Paulin, who is board member of the startup Quandela, former CEO of OVH Cloud, and the French cloud provider and formerly SFR. Henri Verdier is the CEO of INRIA, and no, he's not. INRIA's foundation. Important detail. And former ambassador for digital affairs for the French government. And then we have Gonzague Boutry, who is managing director for digital infrastructure at Ardian. Welcome to all of you. Now, I want to start by asking each of the panelists a question which, we can't really get into any detail without understanding the answer to this first. And that is, what is digital sovereignty? Michel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, because in fact, it's very surprising to see that now everybody is talking about sovereignty. Most of the time, people who are talking most of the sovereignty are not at all sovereign. But anyway, I will give you my definition, and certainly it's not certainly the right one. My definition is freedom of choice. Sovereignty is freedom. It's freedom of choice with the understanding of all the dependencies you have, especially in the digital world. And for me, you have three major dependencies that you need to take into account. The first one, of course, is technological dependencies. And you need to see all the stack, from the algorithm at the top, down to the terre rare, down to the electricity, the software, the cloud, the GPUs, everything has to be analyzed and to see where are the dependencies. And especially Europe is dependent on nearly every layer. The second is definitely what I call the only legal part, which is the dependency due to the fact that now some countries like China or US are using digital world to create geopolitical and legal strengths. Everything about Cloud Act, the FISA Act are really something creating dependencies for all the investors and all the customers. And the third one is definitely, meant for me as a businessman, is business, is commercial dependency. I don't know if you're aware of what's going on with VMware bought by Broadcom, but they decided to multiply the license by 3. The impact on the customers is huge because they have to divert investment from their old business and their old budget, which is not multiplied by 3, to VMware at the extent, at the expense of the other software. So I think really for me, sovereignty is first. It's not, I would say, protectionism. It's not souverainism. It's really the capability to understand that you have the freedom of choice.
Okay, freedom of choice. Henri.
So because we basically agree, I will ask the next question. I don't understand what we don't understand. Or maybe what you don't understand. We have tons of evidences about the costs, the costs and the risks of technological dependencies, and everything is obvious. I was just thinking this morning about few examples. So Frédérick did mention the Amazon outage. We saw last month China forcing President Trump to withdraw his tariffs just with a threat on rare earth. And he says, please apologize, I won't tariff you anymore. We saw Elon Musk attempt to influence the course of the war in Ukraine through Starlink. You may have seen the story of the judge, Nicolas Guillou, the French judge of the International Criminal Court, that is under sanctions because he did investigate on Israel and that cannot use anymore Netflix, Expedia, Amazon, Uber, because of one decision in the White House in 1 second. And of course, I don't even speak about espionage because you have to know, I hope you know that if you are under American jurisdiction, every American public servant can see your data without asking the permission to a judge. So we know it. So the question is, why do we continue to have those debates? And I start thinking that maybe, in France especially, we did over-philosophize. So we did discuss about the subtle differences between sovereignty, self-determination, strategic autonomy, blah, blah. And I want to, just to tell you, it should be an entrepreneurial posture. You are entrepreneurs, you are investors. You cannot let your businesses, your investment, your company, in a place where someone can disconnect you with one decision or one reverse of strategic alliance. And of course, there will never be a perfect sovereignty. We cannot be isolated. We don't have a phone operating system, for example. So at the end of the day, you will use some foreign solutions. But it should be a constant and daily preoccupation. You should, in every decision, maximize your degrees of freedom. And for example, maybe I will end with this. If I were an investor, I would never, never invest on any project with just one cloud solution. Never. Because that's stupid. You can lose everything in one night. So, minimum 2 solutions in 2 jurisdictions. We will agree on this.
Yeah, I agree. I think I had in 2 jurisdictions, when you see that you are a multi-cloud company and you have 2 Americans, I think it's a mistake. You should have one from Europe and one from US, and you split 80-20, or by the way, already American cloud provider have 83% of the market in Europe.
Let me bring Gonzague in for your definition.
I will put control of the infrastructure. I had the chance to attend the dinner last week with EDF, and there was the advisor of cyber and AI for the French Foreign Ministry, and he made a reference to the theory of Marx with the base, which is basically the infrastructure, it's the energy, it's tomorrow the AI gigafactories, and above the base, the super structure, with the superstructure being the education, being the media, being the politics. And we need to control, let's say, the base layer, which is our infrastructure, not to have an outsider control of the superstructure and by foreign entity. So I think that's also the reason why today our let's say, nuclear plant, our airport are owned by and controlled by foreign investment. There is also foreign investment protection, like FDI, when you acquire a stake, but that's reflection that we have for let's say, taking stake in already built infrastructure. We need to have for new infrastructure that we will build for tomorrow, and that's exactly the decision that we need to take today, because all the AI infrastructure for the next 10 years are not built. So we are building those infrastructures today, and we need to have, let's say, let's say, protection and European protection and European control to influence, let's say, those infrastructure that we are that we are currently building. So in a short word, let's say, control of the infrastructure at the base.
I can make a brief comment to give you the point. As a diplomat, I did build strong ties with the impressive movement of Indian digital public infrastructure. And that's a story that is worth to know. That's very recent. In 2013, they did ask themselves, why do we have half of the CEOs of the Silicon Valley and 0 unicorn? And after a collective reflection, they thought that, they told me, if you build your businesses in foreign infrastructure, you are like a Uber driver. You will never be rich because they will decide your margins. So they did design digital ID, Aadhaar, digital payment, UPI, and etc., etc. And you know the numbers. They did bankerize 300 million people in 5 years. They did, and today there are in India more electronic payments than US and China together. So that's a very, very impressive story. And they did think carefully about what should be public, so what is a public service, and how to lead the innovation to the market, but with a kind of democratic control of the basic infrastructure of the country. You should really have a look to this impressive story.
But maybe just to build on his point, I think we have the chance that AI infrastructure, again, are not built. So we have the opportunity in front of us. And now, to your point, which is not about philosophy, it's about action and execution.
Well, on that point, I mean, Europe can't hope to compete with the US in investment on everything. What should be the priorities for Europe? And do data centers, we've seen huge investment in those. Is that the right priority for us, Gonzague?
Yes, I think we should be, in a world, we should be patriot. We should be patriot in our investment, especially in such infrastructure. We also need to work on innovation. We have the chance to have incredible startup in Europe, but we also need to work on education. On education, I will flag, let's say, the initiative of the Finnish state, which propose online AI course to all Finnish citizens, and 1.5 Finnish citizens are already subscribed to and did the training online on out of 5 million. So it's a lot, and I think we should replicate that across Europe. I think we should have more European initiative instead of only one single country initiative, but to come back on the infrastructure and be patriotic. I think we have the chance to have incredible energy resource in Europe, especially in France, with the nuclear plant and very well managed by EDF. We have the chance to be at the heart of Europe, and we have the chance to have great connectivity. We were speaking before about connectivity between other European countries. So I think we have all the elements. I think the vision we share at least among ourselves here. So again, now we need to execute, and we need to promote European investors as controlling such critical infrastructure that we are building for tomorrow.
Yeah, yes, I really do agree that on the full stack, data center is one of the key. I think there is one point is that the fact data centers, the barrier of entry to create a data center, a gigafactory somewhere in France is not the same as recreating an operating software for mobile. It's much easier. So it's feasible. It's a question of money, it's a question of expertise, but the level of expertise is not a barrier where you have to confront to someone who has a monopoly, like GPUs, where to recreate a GPU supplier will be really very challenging for Europe. So I think we should select our battles in the full stack, where we can win. We have energy, we have some data center capacity, we have some, I think, short-term capacity to recreate a control of infrastructure, and on the full stack, you have on some layers, a real, what I call a sovereignty, the capacity to really select what you want. However, I think we need also to have a vision for the midterm and long term, to be able to recreate for the full stack a balanced capacity of power against the others. When I say others, the other continent, like US, let's take an example. GPUs, there is no debate. It's very difficult today to battle. NVIDIA has 99% of the market. It's very difficult. Cloud is really challenging, 83% of the market. However, 100% des gagnants ont tenté leur chance, which means that if you don't battle, if you don't try to invest, if you don't try to really help the challengers to have the capacity, and the financiers are key with the customers, they will change the driver. And if we move from 83 to 60-40, that changed really the paradigm of the control and also the paradigm of the rapport de force. I don't know how you say that in English. But really, this is the thing. Because I think it's really what we need to create. And the same thing will occur in the software. We need really to develop. Today, there is only one big guy, which is SAP in Europe. The rest are very, very small. There is Dassault Systèmes, which is the biggest software player in France. But for the rest, we don't have champions like Americans, but also other countries have. And clearly, we need to be able to push investment in these champions, French champions or European champions. And we need to have also a public-private, I would say, partnerships to be able to foster and boost them and to create champions. Otherwise, we are going to lose also the battle. Mistral is a great, great thing. Really fantastic. But it's one. We need to have 3, 4, 5, 6 Mistral in the total chain of the AI. And also above AI, which is inference, specialized AI, where the battle is not over yet. But we need to invest, and we need to innovate, and we need to foster. And I just want to mention what has been said about regulations. In Europe, we love to regulate. Too many regulations for sure. But most of the time, we do not implement regulation. So we love to have regulation. And this is just want to mention, Doctolib got I would say, a fee because there was some anti-concurrential problems. Fine. But the rest, for the big players, it's a scale of magnitude which is very different. Why they are not? Why the autorité de concurrence really do not apply autorité de concurrence, because there are so anti-competitive practices today which make them de facto monopoly. And we should use European regulations first to apply them. DMA, DSA, all these type of things today are not used. This is pitiful. So stop the regulation, but apply regulations.
Henri, you know, what I often feel that there's a lot of, there's always a call for, you know, what the public authority should do, more of this, more of that, more, perhaps not more regulation, but certainly on the investment front. But you've been inside government, you've seen how things work. What do you think that Europe has a strategy for this, and what's the model here?
We have 1,000 strategies. That's the problem. The problem is that we have one industrial policy in Brussels, one regulatory policy, some geopolitics issues, and we have the same in every big countries. And plus, Jean-Louis knows this very well, we are not the innovators, so we should act like gardeners. So innovators innovate, and government can just help them, nurture them, and we don't decide. We will not call the companies to say, now, everybody here or here, and that's great, that's better. So the first problem from my perspective is that we have a global lack of a common conversation and common views on what we should do as a continent. And that's very important. For example, Frédérick told this morning, I totally share this view, we cannot run after the US. If we just try to build more Stargates, to build bigger LLM, we will lose this battle. First, because they do create as much dollar as they want. So if we find $500 billion, they will find $1,000 billion. And because China did prove that a smart policy with some open source model, some chips hacking, because they did this too, some research on efficiency, with looking for smaller model dedicated to precise application, can have a deep impact. So here, for example, as European, we should have this conversation and see more or less the path. And probably because we are European, open source and public infrastructure are in the loop. You know, people don't realize, we are the birthplace of every important open standard, open source, Linux, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, the web itself, the internet half, because packet routing was conceived in the INRIA. So we love to propose a good organization of the world based on science and knowledge, and we know how to do this. I discovered when I became a diplomat that in 1865, so it was a civil war in the US, the Emperor Napoleon III thought, wow, this telegraph technology is beautiful. We should organize ourselves to have international communication. Let's convene an international conference. So they did meet in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the current one, the same one. And they decided to build the first ever international organization that was named the International Telegraph Union, and that is still the ITU. So the oldest agency of the UN system. Because that's us, that's like the metric system. So I don't know what should be the path, but probably we should look for a European way with our culture or tradition, public research, good open standards, etc. Then we should respect the freedom of innovators and entrepreneurs. And so government should not decide. It should finance, invest, encourage, facilitate, protect, but not decide. And then we should, yes, try to have, maybe as you said, a more unified policy, because today is the sad truth. So half of my time as an ambassador were in inter-agencies meetings to fight strongly to have one unique position in European negotiation. And the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Economy and Finance, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs did disagree on everything. So that's maybe the problem today is not which strategy, but how to manage to have one strategy.
Gonzague, I want to sort of look a little bit more deeply at the question of data center investments. I mean, how do you see the balance between the sovereignty agenda and the fact that, you know, energy consumption, energy costs are going to dictate a different sort of set of priorities for investors? What's the balance there?
But before that, just to make the link on the previous question in your question, I think it's a matter of execution. we need to execute better as European. And one of the good examples is the AI summit in France. It has been a massive success with big announcement. We are 1 year later, almost. In February, will be 1 year later. I don't think none of the project that has been announced as part of the AI summit, you recall this more than 100 billion of investment, get any permit. Why? Because in Europe, it took on average 2 years to get permit. And in the US and in China, it took, for such strategic project, it took 3 months, 6 months.
I have to no, the current AI foundation that was announced does exist, has 200 million euros and started to invest in some projects.
Yes, but
yes, I think you did mention the private investment on infrastructure.
If you look at
some of the announcements are executed.
No, I agree.
I was one of the organizers of the summit.
But I think, no, but without joking, I think when you look at the private investment, and we are doing it on a day-to-day because we do have a data center platform in Europe which is called Verne, which announced that they want also to expand in France. And with the support of a European fund like us, I can tell you it's very difficult because there is so many layers and so many strata of the administration that, okay, we get big ambition in France and the president put the bar very high. But now we need to fight in each of the layers, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So yes, there is a massive opportunity, and to come back to your question on energy, because we have a lot of energy resource in Europe. Still, I think this year, like last year, EDF will export the nuclear, some of the nuclear energy, 90 terawatt-hour of energy to our European friends. But definitely, and they can also expand, let's say, that nuclear capacity, so we are not running at the maximum. There is also a massive maintenance capex plan on the nuclear plant, which also will extend the life of the nuclear plant in France. So we are in the heart of Europe. We do have an incredible energy resource. Now it's a matter of using that for the benefit and for building, let's say, what will be the nuclear digital infrastructure of tomorrow.
No, I think I agree with Gonzague. I think execution is really key. It's clear that the legal environment regulations today in France is much more in sort of slowing down all the projects. And I don't think it makes really sense because most of the time it's not for the sake of better wellness. It's really for stupid things. And I think simplification of regulations to help to foster investment in the infrastructure, including networks, because I think connectivity in data center is absolutely mandatory to make it really strong. And everything which is a greenwashing about data center is something which is really also has to be really clarified. Access to energy and commitment on the energy. And we have the chance to have a really green energy with the nuclear. And I know that it's a debate about is it really clean or green or not, but it's green, or at least it's carbonless. And everything takes too long. It takes semesters. In US, in Canada, we are in OVH Cloud, we are in Canada. And we open 2 more data centers faster in Canada than in France. Why? Because it's much easier. And clearly, where it takes semesters, years in France, it takes months and weeks in Canada or in other countries. So I think definitely we need also to rethink what is the environment. The government should, and also local authorities, because sometimes local authorities are very concerned by all this time thing, should help to create the environment, the framework, to boost the infrastructure. They claim to be sovereign, but to create sovereignty, you need to have the right environment. And rather than to decide, as you said, they should foster, help, initiate, and rather than to control and to slow down the process. Today we have the chance as a gigafactory to create really strong infrastructure in France, and we have the capability, we have the energy. It will be really stupid If not, I will use a French word, which is, would be rude, so I'll not use it. But it would be really stupid not to be able to have in the next 3 years enough data centers with enough power to be able to boost after all the software, because we should not forget the software on the top of it. Because if we don't have the software and everything is only based on Anthropic or all this type of software, or Microsoft or all these kinds of things, we will not have sovereignty also. We will have infrastructure, but we will not have the use case. So this is really something we need to say. And as investors, as also customers, you should ask the government to simplify.
Yes, can we elaborate 3 minutes on this question of regulation? Because I feel this is interesting. I give you some points, but not everything. Now, let's recognize that sometimes we do write very bad regulation. And I can recognize with you that the AI Act, for example, is a monster. 450 pages. Nobody knows what is in this text. But for example, the GSA is very elegant. But yes, we learned to write great regulation. I have a story for you. The treaty that did establish the Suez Canal was 7 pages long. And it is stand until the Egyptian Revolution. And it could have continued without the Egyptian Revolution. The treaty that did establish Eurotunnel was 7,000 pages. And it did bankrupt after what? 1 month? 3 months? So 7,000 pages didn't protect the project. 7 pages did organize a project for 2 centuries. So we did learned to write proper and simple and clear regulation. From my perspective, this is a bit about because of some Anglo-Saxon approach of the law and more common law and more. But that's personal. That's how I see the world. So we can recognize that sometimes we write bad regulation. But there is a line that you didn't cross, but that most US citizens are crossing now, officials, because they say regulation is the enemy of innovation. And I want really to fight against this idea and to say just 2 things. First, can you mention any great innovation that was conceived in the Far West? They are not, because if you don't have intellectual property, a good banking system, a police, you cannot create important things. So that's my answer to the US. And 2, long time ago, I did study a bit of sociology of public policies, and my teacher told me, never forget that everything that seems to be a problem is probably the solution to another problem. So if you just disconnect the stupid law, sometimes you discover a big hole behind the stupid law. So we should simplify, but with a respect of public action. And we should understand why they did this like this, and how can we do better and faster and simpler, but with a strong respect of the main architecture. That's my view.
Michel, can I just go back to something you said, and that's about greenwashing. I mean, there is a problem for the investor in data centers, right? I mean, it's to do with sustainability and how that fits in. What's your view on that?
No, I think the energy, I will say, consumption of data centers and the, I will say, exponential acceleration of the use of energy is certainly a problem. However, I just want to mitigate that, because I think innovation also might solve some of these issues. It's clear with the current GPUs type of architecture, it will not be the case. But now the wafer type of GPUs, which are now at the age of being introduced in data centers, will reduce only the energy consumption by a factor of 6 to 10. I don't know if you heard of a company called Cerebra, for example, which is only one of the leaders of this type of new architecture. The liquid, I would say, cooling systems also will reduce the energy consumption. So I think rather than to be afraid of the future and to say, okay, oh my God, this is terrible, this is horrible, we should rather think how we can introduce innovation as quickly as possible in the new data center, I will say, and the architecture of the new data centers to be able to address this issue. Because if we do not address this issue, we'll have the issue. But I'm sure that today there are some paths which will reduce drastically the energy and the water consumption, because we need to have water and energy. So I think when I say greenwashing, it's like sovereignty washing. Sometimes it is used by some players to keep their monopoly, and this is also used by other actors to try to stop any initiatives. And I think we need to be in the middle of both of that. And we will be able to challenge the fact that, oh, there is no alternative and everything should be American or Chinese. And there is another one, is we should not put data center on our field, which will be a strategic mistake. So I think we need to, definitely find the path. And I'm convinced today that we have the technologies to be able to address these long-term, mid-term issues.
Really 30 seconds.
Henri, and then I want to bring Gonzague in.
Plus, if you want to measure the cost of data centers, etc., you should make the balance with other solutions. If I make a video conference instead of taking my car, actually I save energy. So I consume more on data center, but I save energy. So sometimes we should also, we cannot just analyze the growing cost of data center. We should analyze what we don't do if we digitalize something.
Gonzague, do you want to come in on this question of the greenwashing and the question of how that is reconciled with sustainability commitments?
No, obviously it's a question that you see every day on the newspaper. But I think what we need from us as an investor, we need more commitment. We need more commitment in funding, because we need to your point, we need to build new data center, but also energy and renewable energy sources behind. We need to be more in deep dialogue with the key stakeholder at the European Commission and the French state and wherever we build. And last, I think we also need to be more integrated towards the social system and the education system. Because if you explain properly what is a data center, we have a lot of discussion and with the public stakeholder, they don't know what is a data center. So before addressing the question of greenwashing, we need to understand what is the data center, what is the output, what is the input, and we need to have a commitment from us as a shareholder to promote those sustainable energy sources. Michel was an energy data center. Michel was making reference to liquid cooling. Today and tomorrow, with liquid cooling system, the data center will not consume any more water. Before, it was consuming a lot of water because you need water for air cooling. Tomorrow, not anymore. So we have a lot of all this stack of innovation, and it's before, again, I don't like the word greenwashing, because first you need to split the debate and explain behind greenwashing. So water is not an issue anymore, or tomorrow with the new chips will not be an issue anymore. And it's true that it will consume, but again, we expect, let's say, the consumption to decrease year after years with the new technology that will be delivered by the innovation. And what is important for us is to build infrastructure that will allow those new technology that our infrastructure will adapt to this new technology. And I think that's key for us as an investor, because we should be sorry, just last thing, we should be technology neutral in a way. As an infrastructure investor, what we build is infrastructure. We are not building technology. So we need to be agnostic to any new type of ship that will be developed over the next decade.
Your point about education is well taken. I was speaking to a group of young people, probably around 20, 21 students, and they were saying that they didn't want to use ChatGPT at all because it consumes too much energy. So this is part of that sort of generational approach to energy. And if there is, innovation taking place that changes that calculus, that's important to that gets out there, that people understand that. Did you want to come in on that, Michel?
But which point? The generation. I think maybe some students or don't want to use ChatGPT, but if you look at today the ChatGPT numbers, there are many more and more people. So I think, unfortunately, it's not a minority of people who will change the trend. And if you take also other countries where ChatGPT is massively used, so I think the answer is not only social, it's the capacity to innovate. I think, however, and to go back to sovereignty, and it was mentioned by Frédérick, education, innovation, the number of engineers that we need to train, that we need to, in the university, in the grandes écoles, is really very important. And innovation is at the center. I think, as you said, I think the state role is not to control the countries, but should foster innovation. And I think the major heart of the, what I think, personally, I push for as a president of la filière du numérique is really that rather to subsidize companies, we should subsidize innovation. We should subsidize innovation within RIA. We should subsidize academic innovation. And also how we are able to move innovation from academic to startups, to incubator, to be able to create these, I would say, paths from the public sector, which is able to innovate, and private innovation, but also to make that useful and to help them to grow. And again, investors, venture, private equity is a key element of the success of the adoption and acceleration of innovation. So for me, again, the partnership we should have between the public and the private should be at this level. It's not to control and to decide on behalf of the companies. It should be able to create an environment to really boost education and especially attract women, because we have a major issue in tech is that only 20% of the engineers are women, and this is a big problem because half of the humanity we do not attract them. And in India it's 40%, in China it's 40%, in France it's 20%, and surprisingly in the US it's more because they have immigration from India and China, so that's why they have a higher level, but not, endemic. So this is something we should really focus, and this is where we need to accelerate innovation. That can disrupt and challenge the de facto monopoly. I just want to illustrate what you said. DeepSeek, for example, in AI, as creating a thing. Look 5 years ago, 6 years ago. 6 years ago, the winner was Google, AI Google. Suddenly, ChatGPT arrives. Oh, everything changed. DeepSeek arrives. Nothing is stable in tech. It can change in a few months, in a few semesters. And that's why I think we need to continue to be convinced. And there was a question about, is it too late? It's never too late. 100% des gagnants ont tenté leur chance.
Since you did mention women in tech, I just mentioned that the INRIA Foundation is in charge of the program Tech for Toutes, and we did promise to help 20,000 young women to go to the technological studies, and we'll need your help. So I might call you later.
We're running out of time, but I like
the message of Michel, because he is optimist, and I think we should be optimist and I think AI is a chance to again to re-equilibrate the weight of US and US control data center and infrastructure in Europe. So I think let's be optimistic.
But I'm optimistic.
Desperately optimistic.
I'm optimist too, but clearly we should try in our culture to draw our own future without comparing, fighting, answering. We are a strong continent with a huge culture, a long history, with some other assets that were not mentioned so far. For example, the digital transformation of industry is just at the very, very beginning. And we have a lot of factories. So, for example, we should invest on this because Silicon Valley is not there. And that's important to quietly and within our culture, decide our future. And sometimes we miss this because we benchmark every time. China didn't try to copy the US strategy. They did conceive their own strategy. India, either. So that's important. I feel that maybe we do travel a lot. We know the US very well. We see their success. We try to compete a bit like we copy them a bit. And if you start second in those kind of battle, you lose. Because everything is hyperbolic. So if you start the second, when you will arrive at the point where they were, they are much higher. So we need to prepare, as you said, the enemy of Google was not another search engine. So they thought it was Siri, it was not, but it will be AI. So the disruption won't be the copy of the current leader.
Just before we finish, let me ask you the following question, just to round up with your final thought. Do you think we can do it?
I think we are all the three optimists, so I will say
Gonzague.
yes. No, I will say yes. We have the chance to have large investment capacity. We have the chance to, I think we can say, master infrastructure in Europe. When you look at all the amazing airport in Europe, amazing infrastructure engineer in Europe, so I think we know how to build good infrastructure and great sustainable infrastructure. So yes, I think we will do it. Again, the wake-up call was a few months ago. Now we need to execute.
Henri.
Yes, you know, I started my first internet company 30 years ago. We had nothing, no venture capitalists, no startup incubator, no culture. When I said I am an entrepreneur, people heard undertaker, and they thought I was painting houses. So we did build a lot. Today, one of the problems is we cannot do the IPO in Europe, so we need a stock exchange. That's probably the last frontier. But we did build a lot. But again, and I finish with this, never invest in some projects that can be disconnected by one decision. Never.
Michel, you've got the last word.
Yes, we can. I mean, I know that's of course we can. I think we can for many reasons, factually. We have equity, we have funds, we have talents. Europe is the largest, market. We are definitely able to, as you said, make it. It depends on what we say make it. But also, it will be another debate we can have. I think if you take rapport Draghi report, it's easy. The diagnosis is done, and most of what is put in the report is pretty straightforward. It's not rocket science. It's really easy, simple. No, I think, yes, we can. Let's do it.
Well, excellent word to finish with. I'd like to thank all our panelists. A fantastic discussion. Thank you. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your very well-deserved pause. So we've got second panel, another great lineup of speakers. The question we're going to look at in this discussion is there still a path for achieving AI sovereignty, and what is it? So to answer that question, we have on my left Vincent Luciani, French entrepreneur and co-founder and executive chairman of Artefact. Audrey Herbelin-Stup, who is VP, Head of Global Public Affairs and Communications at Mistral AI. Hugo Le Picard, who is Associate Research Fellow at the Center for Geopolitics of Technology at IFRI. And Jean-Louis Messica, who is a Senior Advisor to Ardian and was formerly Deputy Mayor at Paris Town Hall in charge of planning. So I would like to ask each of you to respond just briefly to a first question, and it's the question that is really behind everything we've been talking about today. And that question is, can Europe compete in the AI race? Vincent.
So I have a few minutes to answer that? It's not an easy one.
Briefly.
Okay, no, so just maybe to complement of everything that has been said, So my point of view is AI is maybe a bit different. Is that AI will be soon, the AI as it is at its use today will be soon be a commodity. Alors why it's going in this direction? How can we perceive it? First, the price. The price of AI, the way we see it today, is going down very rapidly. If you take the price per token now and 2 years ago, the division has been by 10, sometimes at 20, sometimes at 30 on some of the key area. The second aspect you can look into is open source. Okay, if you look into the difference in performance between closed source, so the models that are paid, and open source, you see that the gap is closing every month, right? So that means that the free version is basically closing the gap with the paid version, right? So this is for Gen AI LLM. So this technology, as we know it, it's starting to be a commodity. And the problem with commodity is it follows a rule of economic of scales, right? So it's everything that has been said just before. If you follow a rule of economic of scales, basically you need every time to double your investment for 2 times less achievement, right? So you enter a racing game, especially with US and China, that you know you will lose, right? If you compare the investment, private investment between EU and US this year, it's like the ratio is 20, right? So you know you will lose this battle. The battle we need to win is, on my perspective, but I may be a bit biased on that, is the battle of adoption, right? If you think about AI, the economists, they call it GPT, right? It's general purpose technology. It's like electricity, right? If you think about it, everyone has access to electricity. So in France, we have cheap electricity, green electricity. We export electricity, so there is a value in producing electricity, but at the end, the value of electricity is not electricity, it's why we use electricity. We use electricity for our industry. So it's the same for AI. The value of AI will not come from AI, it will be from the secondary innovation that will come through AI. It will come from the productivity gains that we'll have with AI. So Philippe Aghion was here last year, and many economic studies have shown that we can gain 1% GDP growth per year over the next 7 to 10 years. So 10% productivity gain, we need to seize it, right? So to my perspective, we can win the battle of diffusing AI the most rapidly possible in the economy. And in the long term, if we use AI correctly, we will have more competitive companies, will be more productive, and in the mid to long term, will be also more innovative. Because if you think about what AI can bring to our researcher, to our labs, to our R&D center, this is innovation of tomorrow. So to my perspective, we should use that to accelerate the diffusion, increase the productivity of our economy. And if you look into the numbers today, Europe is not late at all, right? So there has been this study published by Stanford 6 months ago that shows that US company and EU company has exactly the same ratio of AI adoption, right? The difference is very marginal. So my question, I think the message I want to carry is let's seize this opportunity and accelerate and foster innovation, but within the companies that need to use it and incorporate into their processes. And this is what is really tough, because what you need to understand is the evolution of AI is like that, exponential, but the diffusion in the economy and in the big organizations specifically is very, very low. Very slow, because it takes time. You need to adapt your processes, your organization, blah, blah, blah. You all know that, right? It's something that can, last months, years. So it's exactly what we need to do, but it will take time. But if we do it correctly, and in Europe, we have a chance, is that we have more small and medium businesses. So if we can use this opportunity and accelerate using our small and medium businesses who has less processes than the big ones by definition, we can win the battle of adoption and maybe win in 10 to 20 years from now the next battle of innovation with AI. It's my opinion.
Audrey. It's difficult to follow that. I think there's 2 pieces. The first thing is, yes, we can win it, but the second part is we need to win it. I think the first reason why we need to win is that because this technology has so much impact, all the economical impact, but also the soft power, the cultural, the diversity impact, that if we do not own the technology, we will not just lose on the economic part, we will lose everything. We will lose our defense strategy. We will lose our ability to have our languages being there. We will lose our soft power. So we definitely need to own the technology here and have stakeholders that can develop both the LLM, but also the diffusion part and the way you implement it. And to do so, we indeed need to foster the adoption. I really agree with what Vincent just said about how to win it is to promote open source. It's really clear that in a world where AI is being commoditized, open source is a real key to actually accelerate adoption. That's how we built our company. We were really committed to adoption, to open source, because it's created strong adoption, and it's a way to accelerate the technological progress. And on top of it, where you create values is how you specify the models, how you fine-tune them, how you do co-training with partners to make sure that the solution you develop is creating value for the partners. And that's what we are trying to do. But to succeed in this, we need indeed a faster adoption everywhere, and it needs to start with public sector. We should lead by example, and we definitely need to have governments and administration that need to adopt the technology and help to transform public sector to a greater benefit for citizens. The second piece is indeed in enterprise, how we can indeed use the technology not just to transform processes, but we can go deep in industry, in logistics, in manufacturing, and that's where indeed there's a very strong productivity impact in a very short term. But to do so, we need to increase our talent pool. We have a very strong talent pool in Europe, particularly in Paris. But we also have a lot of European talents still working in the Silicon Valley for American stakeholders. So we need to find a way to attract them in Europe, to develop the talent pool, to ensure that we have not only great researchers to build the LLM, but also great people in enterprise, in public sector, to ensure that we can work on, transforming the data legacy that those organizations have, and that's are hurdle to actually a greater adoption. And last but not least, but I know we'll talk about that, we need to work on building a global playing field for European companies and startups working in AI. And we need to make sure that we are fighting with the same weapon in this global race. It's moving really fast. And we need to make sure that we can benefit from our regulation. There's many areas where actually our regulation can give us a leverage and an advantage. And we need to seize that to accelerate further.
Thank you. Hugo.
Thank you. I think my answer is going to be very much in line with what has been said before, but maybe from a more like of a macroeconomic perspectives. So you have two races today. One that is upstream of the value chain, a race for like cloud infrastructures, data centers, GPUs, and like all the stacks that requires massive and continuous investment. We're talking about hundreds of billions everywhere. But you also have more lower in the value chain, the downstream part, where actually really meets the real economy, and where you're going to transform what you said, Vincent, and what is becoming like a raw commodity, like electricity, raw artificial intelligence, into actual economic value. And I think this second part is for us, for Europeans, as much as important as the first part, the upstream part, notably because of Europe's current economic situation. We've been facing a long-term economic slowdown since the financial crisis. Today, our GDP per capita is about half of the one of the United States, and the gap has been widening in the past 20 years. 25 years ago, China was mainly exporting to the world manufactured goods, and now it's competing with US giants on the European soil, such as Amazon, etc. It also has top-level research labs that are competing on the AI field. So for me, the real question is where will China and where will US be in 20 years with AI, and where will we be? And I think it will take a lot of time for Europe to loosen its dependency on like infrastructures, etc. But we should really focus also on the downstream part and how to integrate AI and how to foster its adoptions across all economies, across all industries, across companies to create value and to foster economic growth. And as you said, it's a very slow process. I think there is a real bottleneck today in Europe, but everywhere also in the world in AI diffusion. Basically, you have like traditional companies that want to use AI but don't really know how. And then you have the more like technological or AI companies that are trying to create tools or products for these companies, but sometimes lack a deep understanding of the sectors that they are targeting to create enough value for those enterprises. So the key to the downstream race will really be to be able to bridge both worlds. And I think it will take a lot of time, and there will be like a lot of learning by doing that. Most of the LLM providers about 1 year ago started duplicating Palantir's forward deployed engineer strategy, which is about sending engineers directly at the client site to help them integrate the solution. But I think it will be even more difficult for LLM providers because Palantir had a very like vertical product to integrate, whereas LLM providers have more of a horizontal generalistic technologies. So it will require even more time, even more learning by doing, and even more adaptability. So I really think that we should accelerate in this downstream part. It's a key component for Europe's sovereignty and to win the AI race at least downstream. And I think a realistic short-term sovereign goal for Europe would be to be at the forefront at integrating AI across all our economies.
Thank you. Jean-Louis.
Well, like the other speakers, I will answer yes, we can make it, but there is a lot of if. And the first one, in my opinion, is the question of investment in research and higher education, and understanding why Europe is investing less than the US or China. Don't forget that the European GDP is higher than the American GDP and the Chinese GDP, and the relationship between GDP and investment in research and higher education should be better. And it's not only a question of quantity, it's also a question of quality. We don't invest enough in excellence in research. And of course, and you have said it, our best researchers are trained in Europe and hired by American companies. So this is a very difficult situation, because as far as we are not able to have fundamental research on European territories, on academic structures, and on European companies, the gap between Europe and the rest of the world will be bigger. So the question is why? Why we can't invest? And I think that the answer is the diversity and the separation between countries inside Europe. Each country has its own system. Each country has its own priorities. But there is another cause, which is the place of defense investment. When you are looking at research in the US, and of course in China, you see that a lot of investment in research are investment in defense industry. And Europe have made this terrible choice not to invest in defense. So I think that the new situation in the investment in defense could change the vision of investment in research and higher education. And there is a third point which is very important in my mind. It's this famous concept of sovereignty. In the concept of sovereignty, you have the word sovereign. So, okay, who is the sovereign of the US? His name is Donald Trump. Who is the sovereign of China? His name is Xi Jinping. Who is the sovereign of India? His name is Modi. And who is the sovereign of Russia? His name is Vladimir Putin. And who is the sovereign of Europe? You don't have one. So the question is how a democratic model and a new kind of organization like the European Union can compete with these very traditional models, which are empires. Is it possible for us to invent a new way of fostering innovation in a group of countries which are working together but don't agree to create a true federalism? And in fine, I would say that the main question for us is how is it possible to compete without imitate? And I agree with what Henry said before. If we try to imitate the United States or China, it will be a disaster. You will need to design our own vision of artificial intelligence, our own vision of the path towards this new continent, this new world, and not focus on what Meta is doing or what Amazon is doing and so on. So this is my 3 if to answer your question.
Thank you very much. Vincent, can I ask you, as an entrepreneur, to sort of take on some of these questions about public policy? What is it that we in Europe, what should public policy makers be doing, and what should they be doing less of?
First, I think policymakers, they should set the example. It's what Audrey explained to us. I think we need to lead by example. As far as I'm concerned, it's not the case today. I don't see that the public administration, so I'm traveling Europe, have taken the lead into reforming the administration, putting AI everywhere. And honestly, there is a lot of value in using AI, especially in the circumstances in France now, to help the public administration be a bit more effective. So to me, it's number one. Number two,
maybe we can ask an AI to make the budget of France now.
I think it will be perhaps a bit more organized, but yes. So to me, it's number one. Number two, I think we need to really deeply think into what are the right level of competition we want, and I don't think the answer is trivial, right? We need to be a bit subtle. For example, if I take, so today at Artifact we have probably like between 500 and 700 big clients in Europe. They are all using at least one big part of their IT is using US cloud, right? It's not something we can set one day to another and say, okay, we are not going to use a US cloud anymore. It's just not possible, right? If I compare, so the problem is not the hardware, the problem is the software. If I look into the number of services offered by the US cloud provider, and I do the comparison with the French or the European one, you have a ratio from 1 to 7, 1 to 10, right? It's not AI, it's like data. It's how you stream, how you orchestrate, how you organize, how you store all this data, right? And this has been investment made by US company over the last 20 years, every company has probably invested in software around 100 billion euro, right? So it's something we need to be a bit subtle. There are ways to organize that, right? For example, you can try, and it was la loi de programmation militaire in France, for example, it was a way to put I would say a constraint where you have sensitive data. And you could say, for example, that this sensitive data in Europe, they have to be stored in a local environment or a European cloud. But you need also in this way to think how you can help our company still compete in a global organization, global competition, right? So you need to encourage, for example, portability. You need to encourage hybrid systems. You need to encourage, if you know that your clients are going to use US cloud, you need to encourage control, internalization, training on this cloud, right? So I think we need to be a bit subtle, and I don't think we need to compete with this player because 100% of the French tech in France, they use this cloud provider, and we are proud of the French tech. So we need to be subtle and to encourage some kind of hybrid form, and I believe the answer will be there. And maybe in 20, 30 years from now, we will have enough power to rebuild completely one part of the value chain. Using open source, you can do many, many things today.
I want to come back and pick that up with Jean-Louis in a moment, but I want to ask Audrey first, because Mistral has been so much at the center of everybody's minds, and it's a star of the European AI. But is it right to? Let me ask it this way round: should Europe be working on fundamental models? Is that what we should be trying to own?
We should try to own everything. And there's many parts of the value chain where it will take a lot of time. The chips, for example, we're very, very far from having a European alternative. But yes, we should try to at least have a European option for every piece of the value chain. And the two fundamental ones for me are indeed at the model level, because in the model you put a lot of things about the way you organize data, the way you actually influence in the value you put in it, or you do not put in it, but it's a real way of looking at the society and looking at the world. So we want it to be transparent. We want it to be as diverse as possible, to reflect the diversity of European languages, not just for the aim of languages, but because of all the cultural aspects it goes with. And the second piece that for me is really important to own is infrastructure. And just, it's really aligned with what Vincent just said. We do have data that are sensitive data. If you think about government, you want citizen data to be under strong control when they are plugged to model. So when you think about defense, you do not want your data to be seen by your enemies. So you need to be able to have those two pieces of the chain that are in Europe under European regulation and not submitted to international and US regulation. And that's a piece that is really important. And I think now we are still working hard on the foundational model race, and it's important to progress on the science front because we need to remain relevant, but we need to be able to do that on European infrastructure. And that's where we were quite late. I think now there's a global understanding in Europe that we need to accelerate on this front. There's multiple initiatives, private and public ones. There's a Gigafactory project that may not be the best project, but at least there would be some capacity. There's private sector that has been involved. We have developed our own Mistral compute activity to have this offering of having infrastructure and also to train our own model in Europe and reduce the dependency to American stakeholders. But I think it's really important to have at least those two pieces and to develop alternatives. It doesn't mean that we want, I do not want people to choose Mistral just because we are European. to make that really clear. But I want European people to have the choice and to not be forced to use American solution and not have the alternative. So I want to be picked because my solution is better, but I want people to have the opportunity to choose and not be locked with American or Chinese solution because they are the only one on the market.
Jean-Louis, I wanted to bring you in on this question of EU governance and infrastructure. I mean, you know, how do we get this to happen? What's wrong with the way things are organized at the moment? Is there a model for getting this done? Do we need a European DARPA? What needs to be done?
What I think is that we have already a very good roadmap for the future of Europe, which is the Draghi report. The Draghi report make the proposal of having 800 billion euros of investment per year. It's a huge amount, but it's only 4.5% of the European GDP. So it's possible to do it, okay? And inside such an envelope, you can imagine a 250 billion euros fund for AI specifically, for example. And of course, we must not focus only on the figures in the Draghi report, because there is a lot of things in this paper which are very interesting about governance. And Draghi said, I think he is right, that it's impossible to have a federal power, but we can have some mutualization of decision in the field of finance, in the field of innovation. And we also must have in mind that we need to stop to be naive about international trade. Henri gives the example of critical materials and rare earths, and how can you imagine that 40 years ago you had a lot of industry of refining rare earths all over Europe, and we closed all these industries, all these plants, because the cost of the rare earths coming from China was less important. And I think that we must understand that the time have changed. And for example, we need a small Buy European Act, which mirrored the Buy American Act of the United States. And we need, as you said, a DARPA. The DARPA is for Defense Advanced Research Agency, so we need a European DARPA, maybe a civil DARPA, not only on defense but also on civil investment. But what is a DARPA? A DARPA is a structure that decides very quickly, is able to make a true partnership between public investment and private investment, and put experts and specialists in the decision process, because it's impossible now to ask European bureaucrats to give the good decision on what kind of research, applied or fundamental, we need for the future of AI. So I think that the main subject is the governance of investment at the European level, and it's possible to transform this model and to create a new model. And if we can do that, at that moment it will be possible to compete with the US and China.
Hugo, can I bring you in on a slightly different angle of the same problem, and that's, you know, Europe's AI strategy? I mean, should we be focusing on trying to create a future where we have our own big tech companies that can compete globally, or are we really looking at a strategy of creating small, more nimble, more diversified firms in tech?
I think it's just a question of or having big tech companies or having a more smaller vivid startup ecosystems. I think we really need to have both, because they tend to fuel each other and to nurture each other in a very virtuous loop. And it comes back to what you were saying, Jean-Louis, on the talents. The talents, their formation does not stop when they leave university or when they leave their studies. It continues also when they're entering these companies, whether it's like startups or where it's big technological companies, because big technological companies, they tend to train talent at scale also. It helps them like craft their skill, give them the ability to practice and to do things that they will be able to redo in a startup context. It also gives them a branding stamp. You know when you see like ex Meta, ex Google, etc. It gives them credibility then to fund their own startups. It gives them credibility in front of the venture capitalists, and so it's very important to have a big tech for that in Europe. I think the problem is not that Europeans, when they leave their studies, they're going to American big techs, is that we don't have a European big tech or many European big techs that are able to absorb also all these talents. Also, big techs are very important because they are also pumping a lot of money into the system, whether it's directly investing into startups or just buying back startups. And when you're buying a startup, you're providing also exit opportunity for investors, for founders, for first-year employees, etc. So you're recycling back capital into the ecosystem, and you're creating this kind of virtual loop of investment, of startup creation, etc. And on the startup side, you have also this kind of virtuous loop. I think what you want in Europe is not just like a lot of small startups. You want to give as much as possible the opportunity to scale to your startup, because you're entering another virtuous loop. Is that in the US, it's very not uncommon when you leave your study and you join a startup, you're 10 employees. 12 months later, when you are, if the startup is successful, you're in a company of 100 or 200 or 300 employees. So you're in your early 20s, you just finished your studies, and you've already absorbed a lot of like scaling experience in a very short amount of time. And then when you leave this startup to join or another early startup, you can help it scale again more efficiently, and you can recreate the process and so on and so on. And after that, like if you want to fund your own startup, like you have all this knowledge that you have accumulated, And so I think this is really why we should need both in Europe.
I just want to add something about this question of researchers and why they are working in the big tech American companies. When Xavier Niel created QTI, which is his research lab on AI, a lot of researchers came from Meta, from Google, from Apple, and so on. And I asked some of them, why are you leaving such big companies to go to a very small research lab? And the answer was, it's well paid, of course, the same salary, but more freedom, the possibility to use open source and open science, and the possibility to publish, which is totally impossible when you are working for Meta or for Apple. So this is very interesting because we see that there is a path in the possibility to ask all the French and German and English people working in the Silicon Valley to come back to Europe.
Audrey, I know you wanted to come in, and I'd like to hear you. But could you also answer that question, because we're all fascinated in the experience of people coming back. But how do we stop them going, or does it matter? So if they're going to come back afterwards?
Yeah, just to react on this question of how do we build a European big tech. Not funny is that every time I say on the stage that we have the ambition to become a global player and to be a global champion and to build a European big tech, in Europe people laugh. And it's interesting to see how our risk-adverse mentality and mindset in Europe is also not helping us, and I think people should be, it's really cool, and it's a very positive challenge. And now people are like, oh, are they not too arrogant? Are they not going too fast? Ooh, 500 employees in 2 years. And actually that's exactly also what we say is this is an industry where if you want to succeed, and when I say we want to succeed, I mean Europe want to succeed, we need to scale fast. And we need to have the ambition to go beyond France, beyond Europe, to address Asian market, to address the US. And we have to also work on our mindset in Europe, where we are too risk adverse. We are always looking at this kind of technological and startup success with something that is really weird. Because indeed, the ecosystem is really strong. There's many startups building on top of our open source model. And so it creates something that is very, very positive. And yeah, how do we make people come back? It's a very, I mean, I think we hired a lot of American big tech people from Paris, especially Meta. And indeed, our founders, they came from DeepMind and Meta, and they built the company with this strong belief that we needed a European alternative. And that was really core to us, like we need to build a European alternative. Some stuff we can do, it's easy providing them the right number of GPU per person to experiment properly, so we need more infrastructure. We definitely need more money. We need to be able to pay them as well as American company. We need to fix the question of European equity and stock option and harmonize things. This is something that is very difficult when people join a company like Mistral. They will not have the same salary as OpenAI or Google can provide, but they will make this bet that one day it will be a leverage for them. So we need to get incentive on the equity front. But we need also to offer them a global ecosystem where they can publish, they can share things, and something also is about how do we work on the attractivity of Europe, just in terms of location. We have an office in London, and we had people that came in Paris from the US and who relocated in London after 6 months, because when you do not speak French, it's difficult to live in Paris. So there's many different things that we can do, and we can definitely offer the fact that there's a vibrant ecosystem that can continue to grow in Europe, and it's very attracting for people.
Vincent.
Something I would like to react, and I think one thing I think we struggle in Europe, and I don't honestly have the answer yet, is how we finance the risk, right? So Jean-Louis explained to us, how we create a federated system to pool the investment. I think it's a big part of the answer. The second part of the answer is once we've pooled the investment, how we take risk, right? I remember having discussion with Arthur when he raised money for Mistral, the first. So he raised, I think, 100 million when he started the company. And so he wanted, at the beginning, to raise money out of Europe, right? So he tried to call the VC. So there is a list of VC, probably you know them. And they all say no in Europe, right? Right, because we have a problem in France to finance something in front of €0 revenue. It's not possible. So we have a problem to finance it, but we finance it with research. But we cannot, private investors, they don't finance things in front of €0 revenue. I have the same problem. I also invest in a special technology on quantum systems. It's exactly the same problem every time. You don't have an investor, capital risk in Europe, they don't take risk. They finance things where you have already revenue. And when I look into the profile,
true, yeah.
Voilà, when I look into the profile of the French tech, and I'm nothing against the French tech, over the last 20 years, it's companies that you can scale progressively, that you have revenue, IRR, all these metrics, they have led European investors to take zero risk, because you know that as the metric, you know exactly the profile, you put money in, you have an immediate jump into the revenue, and then you sell it again and again. And I think something we need to create disruptive investment if we want, as it's been explained, to take a different path towards the US and China. We need to invest things a bit differently, right? So we need to take more risk as we have less revenue. And I think it's a question that we haven't really cracked yet.
There's such a good point. Can I just go on, Audrey?
Really, really briefly, and to elaborate on that, there's also, to come back to the idea that we need to foster adoption and that public sector need actually to move faster. I prefer to have revenues and subsidies, to make that really clear, because revenue is driving investment. So I prefer plan when I have public sectors actually passing public procurement and buying my solution than having subsidies. And that's really important as well, is how do we change the mindset and how we are driving revenue and targeting startup with revenue rather than flooding a lot of subsidies. I'm not saying subsidies are not good, but choosing between subsidies and revenue, I do prefer revenue.
And Vincent, just to go back to your point about the risk-taking attitude on the part of investors as being a kind of barrier to scaling up, is that a more important question than any of the others? I mean, we often talk about regulation as being the real problem in Europe, stopping. So that's what's blocking innovation. That's what's constraining the way in which we innovate. But is that, you would say that it's the investment issue, risk-taking investment is the bigger one?
I think in the Maslow pyramid, you need money first. I think regulation has never been an issue. I think start to become an issue when you're big. Regulation, if it's done wrongly, try a tendency to help the big ones. So I think it's more a good regulation should encourage small actors, right? But to me it's a secondary problem. The first problem is how we find money, and I think yes, it's so. I think especially in France over the last 10 years, a lot have been made to create a lot of small companies. But not. I think so. We have two problems. One is how we scale. So I think this we know all, and two, how we create, the good companies that take risks, right? So I think there is a debate to have around should we let entrepreneurs do everything they want, because they all want to make money, right? So they will also all invest in areas where they know they can make money. They are not maybe all risk takers, entrepreneurs themselves, and so should we have some kind of industrial policy deciding a bit, the area where we want to help investors? Should they invest a bit everywhere? So I think it's a debate we should have as well.
We're almost out of time.
In defense of the capital venture in Europe, I would say that there is a big difference between the two markets, the American market and the European market. In the American market, the issue could be the stock exchange or the big tech companies, and in Europe it's very difficult to sell a company, except if you sell a company to an American company. So it's not only the question of venture capital market. It's a question of the global value chain of investment. And private sector and private investment. So I think that the question of how we can transform the stock exchange in Europe may be also a very big question.
So retreat system, right?
Yeah.
We are almost out of time, so I'm going to literally ask you a last question to which there has to be a one-word answer. Can we do it? Jean-Louis?
Yes.
Hugo?
I think Alain used to say that pessimist is of mood and optimist is of will. Le pessimisme est d'humeur et l'optimisme est de volonté. So I would say yes.
Audrey?
Of course, yes.
Vincent?
Yes, but we need to have a different strategy. Short term, to me, foster adoption is the only good answer. Mid to long term, we need to use AI to implement the next generation of research, which should be completely, differently in a different games than LLM, Gen AI, what we have today.
Thank you so much. Fascinating discussion. Thank you. have got a final speaker for the morning, who I'm going to introduce to you. And she's going to give us some thoughts to conclude with this morning. We've learnt a lot. We've had some very encouraging and positive thoughts, I think, in that last panel in particular. So I'd like to thank all the panelists for taking part so far. And in order to round the morning off, I'm going to introduce Pauline Thomson, who is head of data science and managing director at Ardian. And she is going to come and talk to us for the final session, after which you can join the cocktail lunch outside in the hall. And I hope you've all had a fantastic day. Let's listen to Pauline.
Can you hear me? Yep. Hello, everyone. It's always a tough job to wrap up these conferences after all these incredible speakers, and I'm sure you're all eager to go and have lunch, so I'll try to be quick. First, thank you all for joining us today for this second edition of our Artificial Intelligence for Alternative Investment Conference. I wish we had chosen a simpler title. Thank you to our speakers, Frédérick Douzet, for reframing brilliantly the debate, all our panelists, both here and in the workshop sessions, along with our moderator, Sophie Peder, for keeping us honest on time, not an easy task. And thank you to the communication team of Ardian for organizing these events every year. So we framed the day around a simple but consequential reality. AI is no longer just a set of tools. It is infrastructure, governance, and power. Europe's growing reliance on non-European cloud and AI ecosystems de facto creates a dependency path that could constrain future autonomy, with implications for resilience, competitiveness, and regulatory enforcement. As highlighted by Frédérick Douzet, data flows are currently concentrated in a handful of private actors. We heard a lot about this today, and that can create challenges for both sovereignty and market dynamics. Yet, as Vincent just mentioned, roughly 70% of Europe's cloud services come from US providers, and NVIDIA alone holds 90% of global AI chip sales. So we need to be realistic. On top of that, we are now entering in more and more complex geopolitical tensions, bringing about new vulnerabilities which we would not have envisioned even 10 years ago. So that is the context in which investors like us must assess risks and opportunities with a long-term vision. Not an easy task. So how do we navigate this? Several themes have emerged that should guide our next moves. First, we need to recognize that digital infrastructures have become strategic, essential assets. The COVID crisis had already shown us the crucial importance of connectivity for our economies. We realize now that it's also a matter of national security. However, we must balance sovereignty, sustainability, and performance, which in the context of data centers often comes in tension with other strategic decisions such as energy prices, local grid capacity, and environmental constraints. So the question is not whether to care about sovereignty, but how to make it investable and durable alongside efficiency and climate goals. On top of that, as Frédérick Douzet explained, sovereignty is not just where the data sits, but who controls the routing, the standards, the failover. We have just seen few striking examples of this recently. We mentioned Microsoft outage, AWS outage. This has caused interruptions of airports, hospitals, national government agencies, retail stores, with an estimated 10 billion financial damages. Second, Europe and AI ambition must be pragmatic and coordinated. The notion that we either replicate the US-China playbook or give up is a false choice. So we can build on our advantages while tackling our dependencies. This means having clear priorities. We heard a few of them today. Targeted scale where it matters, stronger public-private alignment through incentive programs. We heard more support to R&D and strategic infrastructure, and an ecosystem that keeps talent here and helps it strive. And I think Artefact and Mistral AI are great examples of the talents we have in Europe. The end goal of sovereignty, of course, should not be isolation, but controllable interdependence and true partnerships. In that respect, US hyperscalers can be true partners of Europe and our AI roadmap if we don't let go of what is important for us along the way. Last, we heard that decentralization matters. As we heard in the keynote, there is a case for rethinking architecture, not racing only for the largest frontier model, but also strengthening the fabric of connectivity, data routing, governance that underpins the resilience of our AI systems. So what we can learn from today, I think, is that AI sovereignty is not just a slogan, it should be a strategy. It demands architectural choices, disciplined capital, and collaborative governance. We do not need to win by mirroring others, but we can build reliable, sustainable, and trusted AI systems if we want to keep a positive note. And we have a vibrant ecosystem of entrepreneurs and industrial partners in Europe. Thank you all for being with us today, and see you next year.